Hi, this is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoyed this critical thought, a detailed discussion on game design, and be sure to subscribe and you can pitch future critical thought topics. Okay, everybody, for today's critical thought, we're going to be talking about one of the most dreaded phrases in the game industry, right up there with just add multiplayer, and that is feature creep or scope creep. And for today, we're going to talk about what this expression means and why it has become a prevalent part of game development. So, if you don't know what we're talking about, feature or scope creep refers to the phenomena when a developer will just constantly keep working on a project way beyond the point that development is needed, or just keeping a game in endless development and thereby never releasing it. And this can certainly be the death nail that we've seen for a lot of games, especially in the independent space. And I want to talk about why that is and why there is such a problem of feature creep. Because when you think about it, the longer you spend on a game means that you're dedicated to it and you're trying to make the best product that you can. But the problem is there comes a point when basically time and money are no longer in balance with what you're trying to work on. And this is a very big point, especially for independent and first-time developers. As we talked about, when it comes to the AAA market, you're dealing with major companies. You have publishers, stakeholders, or I'm sorry, shareholders, and you have people looking over your shoulder and making sure that you are on task. In the independent space, however, a lot of indie developers are basically working either in their spare, part-time, and maybe even doing a full-time job and making the game as part of a hobby. And the point is, you're not in a strict sense of being required to have set establishments for your timeline. No one is demanding that you tell them exactly how long your game's going to be. You'll never hear an independent developer or even a AAA developer say something like, my game will be done in 6 months, 5 days, 4 hours, 30 minutes, and 10 seconds from right now. And when it comes to the video game market, or video games in general, there are a few unique aspects that make it very tricky to judge the amount of work that goes into a game. The first one is that video games, as we've talked about, are a combination of entertainment and programming. What that means is you're not just having to make a technically well-done game. You have to make something that is appealing to people. And not just, you and your 5 friends. You want to make something that can reach as wide of an audience as you can, and ideally make something that will hopefully earn you the money that you need to keep going. But because of this, there's a lot that goes into developing a game that can leave you being overwhelmed or frustrated. Like we've said before, it's not just about you making a good game. You have to do marketing. You have to be active on social media. You have to reach out to people to market your game or do the marketing yourself. You have to check the market for when is the best time to sell a game. You have to price your game. And there's a lot more, even, of course, actually making said game and managing people to make the game for you, or with you, I should say. And this creates a lot of different headaches and factors that must be juggled to get your game working. Now, the other point about this is the quality side. Like we said, when it comes to making a video game, there are no set standards for what is and what isn't a video game, much like there is no standards for a genre. If I ask all of you right now, give me a 20-point list of the standard requirements of a 2D platformer, I'm sure that your list will be different. I know some of you will say, well, what about jumping? Well, Bionic Commando was a platformer that didn't feature a dedicated jump button. And this is where things get very tricky. Because when we look at other industries, it's very easy to see or easy to set guidelines or estimates for work. If I have a car, for instance, well, I know what every part is. I have a general idea of how long it could take me to get the parts. And I can have an estimate of how long it would take me, give or take. But when I'm trying to make a video game, especially if you're trying to make something unique and original, any kind of estimates are thrown out the window. Again, how do you define how long it's going to take you to make a game like Stellaris, or Europa Universalis, or Valley Without Wind? You just don't know, and there's a lot of headaches that can come up during development. But that is another topic in of itself. And this is where things can become very nerve-wracking for developers. Because as we've said before, you only have one chance or one time to release your game. You can't put a game on a store shelf, find that there's still 20 critical bugs in there, and say, oops, we need to have a do-over. Can you guys come back in 2 months? Your game is basically blacklisted at that point. And that moment when things get real is very stressful. I know it was for me. When I started doing my presentations last year, before I had even a chance to put anything together, I had to meet with the board of librarians around here to see if they were even interested in hearing me. And I wasn't nervous at all right up until like a week before I went to speak to them. Because all of a sudden it hit me that, oh my God, this is really happening. There is no do-over. If I make an ass out of myself or I'm horrible, they're not going to want to have me back. And then what am I going to do? And this is the same thing for game development. As long as you're working on the game, you're not thinking about sales or what the store is going to give you, or are you going to spend your millions of dollars or anything like that. You're thinking about making this game. But the second you hit publish on whether you're on Humble Bundle, GOG, itch.io, Steam, whatever, that's it. And as soon as you hit that button, the countdown begins. And as we've talked about, you typically have about 30 to 45 days, maybe a little less than that. It's really hard to tell, at least in today's market, of your game being relevant in the marketplace. Now, if it sells amazingly, of course it's going to stay up longer and you'll get more sales. But if it sinks off that front page and no one knows about it, your game's done. And this is where it gets very scary. Because for that month to month and a half, you're going to sit there and think, did I just waste the last 6 months, year, 2 years, 5 years of my life for nothing? And that is a very horrible feeling to be had. And this is where this kind of feature creep and scope creep come into play. Because you can think about it like this. If I spend more time on my game, I'll make a better game. If I make a better game, I can either ask for more money or get better reviews, which will make it stand out better and will hopefully give me a better chance to succeed. But then you enter this, essentially just this downward spiral of, well, I just finished this level, maybe I'll add 2 more levels. Well, this is done, but what if I do this? And what if I just keep adding things on? Then, well, now the graphics don't look as polished. Let me add a new graphics engine. Well, that's not going to work. Now I need to redo my engine. But now this engine isn't working. Let me find a better engine, just redo my whole game from scratch. And it becomes very easy to enter this spiral of, I'm just going to keep putting more and more and more and more work into it, and I'm going to assume that it's going to equal more and more money and more accolades. But that's not the case. And when it comes to feature creep, there are 2 big areas of problems I want to focus on. The first is from a financial point of view. Now, I'm about to shock all of you with this economic secret that Fortune 500 companies spend millions of dollars to figure out. Are you ready? The more money you spend on to make something, the harder it is to recoup that. I know, I shocked all of you with that. But the point is, when it comes to designing any product whatsoever, from cereals to video games to airplanes, again, and you name it, the longer you spend in development and producing this product, the more it's going to cost you at the end. And what that means for a game developer is just what exactly are you trying to make? Are you just making a 5 to 10 hour platformer? Do you want to make an 80-hour RPG? Do you want to make a procedurally generated grand strategy 4X game that has infinite replayability? The point is, what your scope and what you're trying to develop has to remain somewhat in balance with what you're actually trying to spend and what you're actually going to charge people. Because at the end of the day, the consumer does not care about the work that went into your game. They care about the finished product. It doesn't matter if you spend 1 year, 2 months, or 10 years on a game if they find graphics bugs, crashes, slowdowns, technical and gameplay issues, you name it. They are going to mark you for it regardless. And this is where it becomes very dangerous in terms of feature and scope creep. Because if I'm designing this game to be 5 hours long, let's say, and I just spent 5 years of my life making that game, how are you ever going to recoup that cost? Because again, the value of your game has to somewhat correspond with the pricing of it. And again, we can get into an entire philosophical discussion when it comes to game pricing, and we'll be here probably for another 50 minutes if we do that. But if my game is only 4 hours long, 5 hours long like that, I can't charge $40, $50 for that. It's just not going to work. And again, I could use that money. That could easily pay for or recoup the cost of development. But no one's going to buy at that price. Now, if I price it at $5, that's going to be more appealing. But if I spent, I don't know, $700,000, let's say. Again, I'm just pulling numbers out of the air. But let's say it cost me $700,000 to make this video game, and I'm selling at $5 a pop. Either I am going to need a lot of luck, or I need someone like PewDiePie or Markiplier to look at my game on YouTube and get the word out. Because again, it doesn't matter how great your game is if no one's buying it. And when it comes to feature creep along these lines, you have to be able to balance the work with what you're trying to get out of it. And again, when it comes to games like this, especially if you're trying to make I won't say a bargain bin game, but something that is very streamlined, very straightforward, or economic friendly kind of game, it's very easy to balloon that scope. If you start out with 5 levels, what's another 5 more levels? We could add a bonus mode, soundtrack options, create a character, multiplayer, high score lists. And again, we can just sit here and name secondary systems that you could add to your game. And would it make it better? Yes. But at some point, all you're doing is just putting more and more work into it and demanding more money out of it. And there are cases where you can put in so much time and effort into a game that someone may never ever even see or get to. A good example of this, I was talking to a friend about this today for a podcast, was A Valley Without Wind. When Chris Park from RN Games put this game together, they went over the moon in terms of features, design, and trying to make the best damn game they could. And it is a very features-rich game. Unfortunately, not a lot of people played it that far. They saw maybe, who knows, a quarter or maybe even a 16th of the content in that game, and then they stopped playing. And all that other time and work that went into it was basically lost on them. And that is a very big danger of scope and feature creep. Because you may think that this game is amazing and one of a kind and is worth $40, $50, $60. But if everyone only sees a game that they're only going to get maybe 2 hours of entertainment on, they're not going to spend that amount. And when it comes to building your game like this, again, you have to be able to have some idea of just what you want for this title. If you're trying to make a 6-hour long game, then you have to try and keep to that. And you have to price your game accordingly. Now, the other big danger of feature and scope creep is from a quality point of view. And we'll try and wrap this up in the next few minutes before we run extra long. But As I've talked about, one of the core concepts of successful game development is refining and getting your core gameplay loop done as quickly as possible. Again, this is your first 15 minutes of play. The main thing someone's going to do in your game, the bullet point on the box. The quicker you can get that done, the quicker you can then look at the rest of your work and say, okay, if this is my core gameplay right here, then all this stuff over here, how does it relate to it? If it doesn't relate to it, then we can save it for either expansion or DLC or even cut it outright. But if you're constantly changing your core gameplay loop, this can create unintentional consequences and just balloon your game's development out tremendously. Because whenever you change your core gameplay loop, pretty much it means something's going to have to be gotten rid of. And if you're removing or destroying content you've already made, that is time and money that you will never get back. And like I've said before, it is a very, very big red flag if a game is 50 to 60% of the way done and the developer says, you know what, we need to scratch it and start over again. Or we have to completely redo our game systems. Because that is very bad. And again, that is time that you will never see again. When we talked about Clockwork Empires on the Dissecting Design, I brought up what was going on, at least from the outside looking in. The game never, sadly, made tremendous strides in terms of progress. Every 2 steps forward they took, they went 3 steps back. They kept going back and redoing and re-altering game systems that they've already finished a month or 2 before. And if you're constantly trying to iterate and keep working on stuff you've already done, the new stuff is never going to get done. And then what happens if you get to that stuff and you realize that what you did before no longer works? So now I have to go back and do that again. And then what if I make that change and now the new systems don't work? And again, it's just a cycle that can become never ending. And more importantly, if you're just constantly adding in new features and growing your scope, it becomes very easy to muddle your core gameplay. And we can see this especially in systems-heavy games. Stuff like, when we talk about systems-heavy, I'm referring to games like Europa Universalis, Stellaris, Stonehearth, RimWorld, Dwarf Fortress, you name it. And in these games, they are built as a collection of systems that are all integrated into each other. Essentially, the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. And when you have systems like this, any work you do is going to reverberate out to your other systems. This is why Prison Architect's design was such a really great example of managing this. Each month, Introversion worked on new systems, but they always made sure that the previous systems were refined. They always had a base that they knew was working, that it was enjoyable to play, and that it was done. So if, let's say, they spend 2 weeks on something and it's horrible, the system is not working, we just can't figure it out, well, we already know what works with our game, let's go back there and start over. Yes, we are losing progress, but it's better to lose it at that point than, say, get 5 to 6 months down development and realize that none of your systems are working together. And with Arcane Games, with I believe the game Stars Beyond Reach, they ran into that problem where they just couldn't get these systems working. Now, I don't know if that's an issue with a core gameplay loop or just, going way beyond their initial scope, but that would be another big example of sometimes systems just don't work. Again, there is no 100% perfect guide to game development. And like I said, when you're trying to create something that's a combination of programming and entertainment, you don't know how things are going to turn out. You never know when one system could theoretically make your entire game, when your game hits that magic point when everything comes together and works. Or you try something new and it completely breaks your game and now you have to go back. But when it comes to game development, you have to understand what it means to manage a project. Now, one of the dangers and why this kind of feature and scope creep is so alluring is that we only hear about the successful stories. we hear about developers who, again, are driven by that passion to spend 4, 5+ years on a single game to try and make the best damn game possible. But for every success story, I am sure there are countless more of teams that just collapse under that. Now, a good example of the difference in this kind of mindset would be a game like Dwarf Fortress. Dwarf Fortress is being designed as, the developer's baby. This is their Mona Lisa, the masterpiece that they are going to dedicate themselves to. And again, the video game industry is a very passionate one. And I'm sure many developers see their games, again, as these unspoiled masterpieces that they have to make. But at the end of the day, you still have to understand the business side. Now, with a game like Dwarf Fortress, they have gone on record saying that they don't care about the money. They don't care about having deadlines or a publisher telling them what to make and how long to spend. They are going to spend as long as they want making Dwarf Fortress. And they don't care. Their fans don't care. I am sure for you folks watching this who have played Dwarf Fortress, you don't care. But that's not a business model. That is as far away from a business model as you can get. And again, when it comes to development, especially for first-timers, you have to understand or be able to balance the creative side with the management and business side. Because, again, if you're only trying to make a game that's 5 to 10 hours long, something is seriously wrong if we're 2-3 years plus into that development. So, with that said, we're going to wrap things up here because we are getting onto the long end. To end things on, I want to ask you folks a question, and this is especially for the developers out there. Have you struggled with feature/scope creep before? And were you able to get around it? And if so, how were you able to fight back against it? When I spoke with the developer from Bow Brothers, he talked about how they had an organizational list of basically order of priority for content versus time and money. So they had a good idea of how much it would take to make something, and then they would only focus on things that earn them basically the most bang for their buck. But again, everyone is different. But thank you so much for watching today's Critical Thought. I think it's going to be a critical thought. I was kind of wishy-washy between the two. If you're new and you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know you have a future topic for a vlog. And check back daily for more design discussions here on GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, have a great night. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And come back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on game development, be sure to check out game-wisdom.com. Follow me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day. And to help support everything that I do, you can find me on Patreon under GWBycer or Game Wisdom. Your donations can help to keep things running, and we hit some goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy. So, thanks again for watching, and be sure to come back for daily discussions on game design on the Game Wisdom channel.